welcome to Daily English Stories. Every story hides a world. Some inspire, some haunt, some stay forever. Chapter 1. The Curious Child. Albert Einstein's story begins not with brilliance that dazzled the world, but with silence that worried his family. He was born on March 14, 1879, in the small German town of Ulm, to ordinary parents. His father, Hermann Einstein, was a businessman dealing with electrical parts, while his mother, Pauline, loved music and learning. There was nothing unusual about the birth except for one detail that made relatives raise their eyebrows. Albert's head was larger than most newborns. Jokes were whispered, but behind the humor lingered a quiet question. Would this child grow up to be ordinary, or was there something different about him? As Albert grew, his difference became even more apparent. While other children around him spoke their first words with ease, Albert remained silent. He did not speak until he was almost 3 years old. His parents worried something was wrong, and neighbors teased, calling him the quiet one. Yet, in those moments of silence, Albert was not empty. He was observing. He watched, listened, and thought deeply, as if the world around him was a puzzle waiting to be solved. At the age of 5, an event occurred that would leave a permanent mark on his young mind. His father handed him a small object, an ordinary-looking compass. Albert held it in his tiny hands and turned it in every direction. No matter how he moved, the needle always pointed north. He could not see any strings, no hands guiding it, and yet it worked. How? Why? For Albert, it was nothing short of magic. This invisible force, unseen yet undeniably real, filled his mind with wonder. Later in life, he would recall that compass as the moment he first realized there were hidden truths in the universe, waiting to be discovered. School, however, was a different story. In the classrooms of late 19th century Germany, education was strict and rigid. Students were expected to memorize facts and repeat them without question. Albert could not stand this way of learning. His mind was restless and curious, always full of questions. Why does light travel so fast? What makes the sky blue? What lies beyond the stars? But instead of encouraging his curiosity, his teachers scolded him. One even told him, "You'll never amount to anything." These harsh words stung, but deep inside, Albert knew his way of thinking was simply different. Despite his struggles, there were things he loved. Mathematics quickly became his favorite subject. Numbers, to him, were not dull figures on a page, but living symbols that unlocked patterns of the universe. He would spend hours solving problems, treating them like puzzles, waiting to be completed. He called mathematics the language of the universe. His mother, Pauline, played her part too. She introduced him to the violin, encouraging him to practice even when he resisted. At first, Albert hated the discipline of music, but slowly, melodies began to calm his restless mind. Music became his escape, a way to think more clearly, and it would stay with him for the rest of his life. Then there was his Uncle Jacob, a man who loved mathematics as much as Albert did. Instead of boring lessons, Jacob turned numbers into adventures. "Mathematics," he once told young Albert, "is like a treasure hunt. Every problem is a clue leading you closer to the truth." With that playful encouragement, Albert's love for numbers grew deeper. Unlike most children, Albert preferred books over games. He devoured stories about great scientists, their discoveries, and their struggles. Often, he would imagine himself making discoveries of his own. One day, As he walked home from school, a strange thought crossed his mind. What would it be like to ride on a beam of light? It was a question far beyond his years, but it became a seed that would later grow into one of the most groundbreaking scientific ideas of all time. His early life was not easy. He faced doubts, misunderstandings, and rejection from teachers. But he also carried within him something far more powerful than approval. He carried an unstoppable curiosity. That compass, those hours of silence, the books he read, the questions he asked, all of it shaped him into someone who would not accept easy answers. Albert Einstein's childhood reminds us that greatness does not always announce itself with loud brilliance. Sometimes it hides quietly in a child who speaks late, who asks strange questions, who refuses to simply memorize what others say. For Albert, curiosity was not just a habit, it was the very heartbeat of his life. And though the world could not see it yet, the quiet boy with the big head and the restless mind was already preparing to change it forever. Chapter 2. Struggles and Breakthroughs. Albert Einstein's teenage years were not filled with the kind of success one might expect from a boy destined to change science forever. Instead, they were marked by struggles, disappointments, and a long search for belonging. At 15, his life took a difficult turn. His father's business collapsed, and the family was forced to leave Germany and move to Italy in hopes of starting over. For Albert, this meant separation from his parents, loneliness, and the painful uncertainty of what would come next. School in Germany had already been unbearable for him. The rigid system demanded blind obedience and memorization, things Albert despised. He craved freedom to ask questions, to challenge ideas, and to explore curiosity without limits. His teachers, however, saw this as laziness or even defiance. One teacher bluntly told him he would never succeed in life. The words hurt, but Albert's spirit refused to be broken. Eventually, he dropped out of school, deciding to learn on his own rather than endure an environment that suffocated his curiosity. Alone in Italy, Albert spent hours with books on mathematics, science, and philosophy. He taught himself what schools had failed to give him. He explored the works of great thinkers, filled notebooks with calculations, and pushed his imagination further than ever before. At just 16, he wrote his first scientific paper. It was not perfect, but it was a glimpse of the brilliance waiting to unfold. Determined to shape his future, Albert applied to the Swiss Federal Polytechnic School in Zurich, a prestigious institution known for encouraging free thought. His first attempt ended in failure. Though his mathematical and scientific skills were exceptional, he performed poorly in languages and history, which pulled down his score. Many young men would have surrendered at this point, believing they weren't good enough. But not Albert. He studied harder, filled the gaps in his knowledge, and tried again. This time, he passed. At the Polytechnic, Albert finally found an environment more suited to his restless mind. He spent his days buried in mathematics and physics, asking the kinds of questions most students never even considered. What is light? How does time behave? Why does gravity exist? For him, these were not abstract wonders. They were puzzles he was determined to solve. It was here that Albert met Mileva Maric, the only female student in his class. Mileva was brilliant, passionate about science, and unafraid of challenges. She quickly became more than a classmate. She was a friend, a confidant, and eventually his partner in life. The two would spend long evenings discussing theories, challenging each other's ideas, and dreaming of discoveries that might change the world. Together, Albert once wrote to her, "We will conquer the world of science." But dreams did not erase hardship. After graduating, Albert expected to find a teaching or research position. Instead, rejection after rejection greeted him. His professors, unimpressed by his rebellious nature, refused to recommend him. Universities turned him away. For months, he struggled to find work, feeling the weight of failure pressing down on him. Finally, in 1902, he secured a modest job at the Swiss Patent Office in Bern. It was hardly the glamorous role of a scientist he had imagined. His work involved reviewing patent applications for new inventions, checking if they were truly original. Yet, in this unlikely place, Albert found something invaluable: time. The job was steady, the hours predictable, and in the quiet moments between reviewing applications, Albert allowed his mind to wander freely. He began to call the patent office his thinking lab. On scraps of paper, he scribbled notes about light, time, and space. While others might have given up on their scientific dreams, Albert clung to his, refusing to let the world's doubts define him. Then came the year that would change everything, 1905, now known as his Annus Mirabilis, or Miracle Year. At just 26, Albert published 4 groundbreaking papers that shook the foundations of science. The first explained the photoelectric effect, showing that light could behave as tiny particles called photons. This idea would later earn him the Nobel Prize. The second paper clarified Brownian motion, proving the existence of atoms beyond doubt. The third introduced his most famous achievement, the special theory of relativity, which proposed that time and space were not absolute but relative, forever linked by the speed of light. From this came the now legendary equation E equals mc squared, revealing that energy and matter are interchangeable. In one astonishing year, the quiet boy once called a failure had redefined the very laws of the universe. His papers were not just clever theories. They were revolutions, shaking physics to its core. What made this transformation even more remarkable was that Albert had done it all as an unknown clerk with no prestigious position or powerful connections. He had achieved greatness not through privilege, but through persistence, curiosity, and an unyielding belief in his own questions. Albert Einstein's struggles as a teenager and young adult were not obstacles meant to stop him. They were stepping stones. The loneliness, the rejections, the humble job at the patent office, all of it prepared him for the breakthroughs that would change history. By the end of 1905, the world no longer ignored his name. Scientists everywhere were forced to reckon with the revolutionary ideas of a man they had once dismissed. Albert Einstein had gone from rejected student to scientific pioneer, proving that brilliance can bloom even in the most unexpected places. Chapter 3. A Legacy for Humanity. Fame is a peculiar thing. For Albert Einstein, it arrived not with a slow knock at the door, but like a storm that swept across continents. One day, he was the quiet patent clerk who scribbled equations on scraps of paper. The next, he was being hailed as the man who had redefined how humanity understood the very fabric of the universe. Reporters crowded outside his lectures. His face appeared on newspapers across Europe, and for the first time in history, a theoretical physicist had become a household name. Yet, behind the wild hair, the thoughtful eyes, and the reputation of genius was a man who remained deeply human, gentle, curious, and forever restless in his search for truth. Einstein's theory of relativity, once ridiculed by skeptics, gained worldwide recognition after a solar eclipse in 1919. The bending of starlight, just as his equations had predicted, was observed by astronomers, and the headlines declared, "Einstein defies Newton." Almost overnight, he became a symbol of human intellect and imagination. But unlike others who might have basked in glory, Einstein carried his fame with humility. He often reminded people that he stood on the shoulders of giants, acknowledging the scientists before him who paved the way. As the years passed, Einstein's voice extended far beyond the lecture hall. He believed that science could not exist in isolation. It had a moral duty to humanity. When war raged in Europe and hatred spread like a disease, Einstein stood firmly for peace. He opposed militarism, criticized prejudice, and spoke openly against anti-Semitism long before it reached its darkest form. Being Jewish himself, he understood the growing danger in Germany. By the 1930s, as the Nazi regime rose to power, Einstein made the painful decision to leave his homeland. He would never return. In 1933, he settled in the United States, accepting a position at Princeton University. There, he found a new home, but his heart always carried the ache of exile. He watched with sorrow as his birthplace was consumed by violence and his people faced persecution. Though safe in America, Einstein used his voice to advocate for those who could not speak for themselves. He became not just a scientist, but a moral leader. Ironically, his famous equation, E equals mc squared, which unlocked the secrets of energy and matter, later played a role in the development of the atomic bomb. Though Einstein himself did not build it, his discoveries laid the groundwork. When he learned of its destructive use in Hiroshima and Nagasaki, his heart was heavy with regret. He spent the rest of his life calling for nuclear disarmament, urging world leaders to choose peace over power. To Einstein, science was meant to illuminate the mysteries of creation, not destroy it. Despite the weight of fame and responsibility, he lived simply. He walked to work with his papers tucked under his arm, often forgetting to wear socks and preferring the comfort of old sweaters over polished suits. He played the violin when his mind needed rest, filling his home with music that carried both joy and melancholy. For him, creativity flowed as naturally from music as it did from mathematics. Even in his final years, when most would have rested on past achievements, Einstein pressed forward, wrestling with unfinished questions. He sought a unified theory that could bring together all the forces of nature into one grand framework. Though he never found the answer, his determination symbolized the essence of his life, a refusal to stop questioning. On April 18, 1955, Albert Einstein passed away in Princeton, leaving the world quieter, yet forever changed. He had given humanity new eyes with which to see the cosmos, and, more importantly, a reminder of the power of curiosity, courage, and compassion. His legacy is not confined to the blackboards of physics or the pages of textbooks. It lives in the spirit of every child who looks at the stars and wonders why they shine, in every scientist who dares to question the impossible, and in every dreamer who believes that even the smallest compass can point to the greatest discoveries. Albert Einstein's story is more than the tale of a genius. It is the story of persistence against odds, humility in the face of fame, and an unshakable belief that knowledge should serve humanity. And as long as curiosity exists in the human heart, his legacy will never fade.